Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to another time of Wandering Toward Wonder. I think we're live this morning as we kind of get going. My name is Will Ed Green, and I am so glad you're joining me today. I serve as an associate pastor and the director of discipleship at Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. And this is a time that we get to set aside each week to think about the ways that we are, by God's grace, cultivating joy and hope and wonder in our lives. I am so glad. I'm so glad you're with us. And as we come into this space together today, I want to celebrate the fact that you are joining me. I see some folks are just joining us now. So let me know. Take a few moments if you can, and share where it is you're wandering in from today. Perhaps too, where you're seeing places where there's some wonder in whatever space you're tuning in from. I'm calling in from my home in Brightwood Park in Washington, D.C. And I've got to say that today, as I'm tuning in, I'm finding a lot of wonder. Just on the other side of my computer screen, I can see the light coming in through the leaves on the trees, the new leaves that have just seemingly miraculously appeared. And I'm finding a lot of wonder in the way that the light is kind of filtering through the trees. It's a gorgeous day. And I hope the same is true for each of you, that you're finding some space for wonder in your lives this morning. So last week, if you were with us, we talked a little bit about kudzu, this invasive vine that is so present in the South. And I know some of my Southern friends are intimately familiar with kudzu and all that it does. And we compared that to the ways that there's this kind of spiritual kudzu, things like mistrust and anger and resentment that can infest and overtake our spiritual gardens, right? And we talked too about that image of vines and vine growers, right? This story that comes to us from the gospel that we read the previous Sunday, in which Jesus reminds us that he is the vine onto which we're grafted and through which we're rooted in God's love. I've been finding a lot of wonder lately in the gospel readings in our current sermon series, Give Me a Word. And in this week's gospel lesson, explored by the one and only Reverend Dr. Kelly Grimes, my colleague at Foundry, I found myself on yet another kind of exciting and interesting tangent, wandering around and finding some wonder in thinking about relationships and friendships and the way they help us grow and abide in God's love. So today, clearly, in light of that, I want to talk about goats. So some of you may know, and some of you may have seen that goats are all the fad these days, right? You've got goat yoga, you've got goat cafes, you've got all kinds of things where people are playing with goats and they're doing things with goats. And we might be tempted, as one of my friends during my trip back home suggested, to think of all these goat trends as just another passing fad, driven by too many people with too much time, too much money, and not enough to do. But goats, interestingly, have this long history of helping bring calm and order to otherwise chaotic barnyard menageries and in relationships with humans. Interestingly enough, I was on a walk with a friend last week, and I found out that goats are often used in horse stables. Strange, right? To help calm thoroughbreds and racing horses, especially before they run. And so, of course, first I'm thinking about goats, then I'm thinking about friendships and relationships. And so I've got to do some research, right? And what I found is that for centuries, and perhaps as long as humans have cultivated farm and racing horses, farmers and horse owners often keep goats alongside the horses in their stables, right? Turns out, go figure, that horses, especially those that are used for racing, are notoriously anxious animals. Perhaps because they're herd creatures and separate from the wide open spaces and other horses to be around. When they're kept in stables or when they're kept in barnyards, horses can often slip into something akin to panic attacks. They'll sway from side to side. They'll headbutt the walls of their stable. They'll bite at the air and the stuff in their stable. They fall into deep depressions often, where they won't eat or where they become lethargic. And what over the years folk began to realize is that when goats are introduced into stables where horses are kept, the goats and the horses form this really strange and unlikely friendship. The horses have this tendency to adopt these goats as their kind of their stable buddies, right? And the goats, in turn, help the horses stay calm. They help combat some of this anxiety. They help combat some of this depression. And as I was doing this research, this like Wikipedia hole that I fell into, there are all these stories about goats being adopted by horses, horses parenting goats, tending to their needs. There was this one particularly tender story where a horse would tuck the goat in at night. Like literally the goat would lay down in the horse's stall and the horse would kind of pile the hay on top of the goat so that the goat could sleep comfortably, right? So you've got this unlikely friendship between horses and goats, and it spurns all of this other kind of social kind of commentary and thinking about goats. If you've ever heard the phrase, "Don't let them get your goat," or "Oh, he got my goat," it's actually related to this relationship between goats and horses, right? So what would happen is rival horse owners or horse racers would steal the goats from their rival or their competitor's stable in order to upend or upset the horses before they ran so that they would have a competitive advantage, right? So this idea even of somebody getting your goat is rooted in this unlikely friendship. So on Sunday, Pastor Kelly preached this beautiful sermon on this passage from the Gospel of John that includes these words. Jesus says to his disciples as he's preparing to ascend, "I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything I've heard from my Father." Now, if you've not had a chance already, I want to encourage you to go back and watch Pastor Kelly's sermon. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it lays out in really meaningful ways the kind of concept of Christian friendship. And I found myself particularly struck by the way that Jesus starts talking about friendship and relationship among Christians. In the preceding verses, Jesus tells the disciples that they are his friends if they do what he commands. And then he outlines this robust vision of friendship in which the joy of one, the hope of one, the life of one, our being, our existence is inexorably tied to others. Friendship becomes not simply a way of passing the time, but a lifeline, an avenue by which we both live and grow in the abundance of life that Jesus desires for us. Friendship, this Christian relationship, is not only an outcome of our relationship with God, it is a vital part of what we're called to do and called to be in Christian community for and with one another. And so this idea of friendship, which, in our world sometimes gets kind of watered down, right? Is deep and rich. Friendship isn't about being around people you like or agree with, right? Folks who kind of bolster your perspectives or opinions. It's about being and cultivating, being a part of and cultivating a community of people who ground us in God's love in an ongoing way, who will give of themselves for the sake of our well-being, and who expect and will demand of us that we are willing to do the same that they do for us. So there's this profound spiritual reciprocity and this kind of friendship, this relationship that transcends simply liking somebody or being able to laugh with somebody or having a buddy to go out carousing with on a Friday night. Not that we clergy ever do anything like that. Never. It's instead this idea of Christian friendship, of relationship, is about a commitment to one another that is willing to transcend the chaos of conflict, right? When things go sideways or fall apart, when we disagree or find ourselves struggling with one another, this kind of friendship is willing to move past that because it has an eye on the bigger picture, the promise that relationship offers us. It sees a scope of life that is larger than the pettiness of momentary divisions or disagreements. And is unwilling to yield in those moments, even if boundaries need to be withdrawn, even if conversations that are challenging need to happen. It is unwilling to withdraw itself because it knows this kind of friendship demands that we know that our lives are bound up with one another, that there's nothing that we do outside of those relationships that doesn't impact not just us, but all of the people around us, including those whom we love and we call friend. And this kind of relationship is the leaping off point to the deep kind of spiritual trust that beyond the brokenness that we may bring to any human relationship. And can we just be real for a second? Don't we all have baggage? Don't y'all have, y'all have got baggage, right? Because Lord knows I've got like 6 carry-on cases that follow me wherever I go. But this kind of relationship, as we lean into it, as we learn how to live it out, becomes the way that we begin to trust that beyond all that baggage, beyond all that brokenness, beyond all that that trauma, if you heard the sermon that I preached a couple of weeks ago, that leads to suspicion and doubt and pain, that when we're rooted together in God's love in a deep and meaningful way, when we are abiding in God's love revealed in Jesus, that there is always hope for healing. So that rather than drawing hard lines of no, not and yet, right, never again, there's always a door open for newness of life, newness of relationship, restoration, and healing. Now, this kind of friendship isn't easy, right? Jesus certainly doesn't make it sound that way in the passage that we read in the Gospel of John. In fact, this kind of friendship is counterintuitive for many of us, myself included, particularly if you've got a strong desire for self-preservation or protection, right? Opening ourselves up to others in this way is a skill that we learn over a lifetime. It is not, for many of us, a natural inclination. It challenges our tendency to treat relationship like a transaction in which we're netting only what we need or just giving enough in order to get back what we want out of somebody else. This kind of friendship is profoundly countercultural. And this is where Jesus enters, right? Into the kind of relational economy, so to speak, that treats friendship like transaction. And in a way, Jesus kind of becomes our goat, right? Jesus becomes our goat. If we are the anxiety-prone thoroughbreds who struggle to figure out how to live out this kind of relationship in a deep and meaningful way, Jesus becomes the model and the vehicle and the companion along life's journey by which we're able to combat those naturally anxious tendencies and are better able then to do the work that God has laid out before us, to steal that image from the New Testament, to run the race with perseverance, following the author and perfecter of our faith, who is Jesus Christ our Lord, right? Jesus is our goat, and Jesus shows us, I love that image of Jesus as goat. That's a gift for another day, I suppose. But Jesus becomes our goat, and Jesus shows us how to be goats for one another, how to be companions to one another, how to help hold and love and live with and befriend one another, with an eye ever fixed on being and becoming who we are called and created to be in the world, right? Jesus is our goat. And John's gospel reminds us that the work of abiding in God's love, which has been a major theme in all of our gospel readings over the last few weeks, is never a solitary task. We do it together, Christ with us, us with one another, right? As the pandemic persists around us, and even as things are for many people, not all people, but many people are returning to normal, there is so much anxiety, right? Are y'all feeling anxious these days still? Because goodness knows, I feel like I'm swimming in a sea of it. I'm eating soup made out of it. Like my life is surrounded with this kind of persistent pandemic anxiety. There's deferred grief. There's grief over what's been lost. There's grief over what we will enter into that will be fundamentally different than what we had before. There's grief over realigned relationships with people. Relationships have failed and faltered. Relationships have been born. There's realignment around work and space and worship and the kind of very fundamental things that hold our lives together. So now's the time, friends. Now's the time for us to go get our goats. That's the point of today's conversation. Go get your goat. Go get your goat. Now's the time to begin to cultivate relationships with one another in all the ways that you can, right? Through small groups, through one-on-one conversations, through reaching out to that person that you've not reached out to in a while, or that suddenly pops into your mind unexpectedly on a walk through the park. But to begin cultivating those relationships, those friendships, those deep and abiding connections to one another that help us abide in God's love. Now's the time to begin to reinvest in the practices which grounded us prior to the pandemic, which for whatever reason and with no skin off anybody's nose, we've had to give up, right? Those things we know we need in order to remain grounded in connection to God and one another. Now's the time to figure out what is and what isn't our goat, right? We've had this opportunity to get real clear, I think, for many of us, what matters and what doesn't, what connections matter and which don't, right? There's this opportunity for winnowing through the stuff that fills up our lives and investing in what matters the most. And now's the time to continue reinvesting more deeply in the things that you have learned to be true about yourself, to be true about your relationships during this time. There has been an opportunity, I know at least for me, to deepen some relationships that were surprising and unexpected, to realize some hard and uncomfortable truths about the way that I related to other people, to challenge myself to think differently and creatively and critically about how I monitor my time and my energy. And part of what I'm trying to do is I think about getting my own goat, is how to sustain some of that learning in a way that helps me show up in loving Christian friendship with others. Do a spiritual check of your own like emotional, spiritual well-being. Where are you feeling? Where are we feeling disconnected or disengaged? And I'm not just talking about, oh, I miss hugging people or, oh, I miss singing hymns. I get that. But I'm talking about where is it that you are feeling that deep disconnection, that deep lack of abidingness that will sustain you, not just when we're back doing those in-person things, but that you will need in the continued spaces of silence and absence and loneliness and isolation. Because those things aren't going to go away. If we're being honest, these weren't inventions of the pandemic. They existed before. The pandemic simply gave us an excuse to acknowledge the shared language of these experiences, to name them and bring them to light, because we'd previously been uncomfortable to. Where do you need to find your goat? Where do we need to find our friends? How do we need to begin to get those relationships back in order? I want to encourage you to spend some time this week thinking about this. Do some wandering around and wondering about yourself and about the world, and how perhaps in this season, as we continue to figure out what it means to move together into what comes next, whatever that may be, we can do so abiding in God's love and abiding in relationship with one another that allows us to change the world. At least that's what I've been thinking about these last couple of days. And if nothing else, we got to talk about goats. So that's pretty exciting. And friends, know that I'm so glad that you joined me again today as we shared in this time of wandering toward wonder. I'd love to know where you have your goat, where you're finding goats. Please feel free to share that in the comment section. I'd love to follow up with you after my live has concluded. Do want to, and Catherine, thank you. Spiritual inventory fits well with spiritual autobiography. So if you want to know more about spiritual autobiographies, go onto our YouTube page. There's a video that we created just a few months ago that allows you to kind of walk through that with somebody so that you kind of know what that spiritual autobiography process is like. I'd encourage you to check that out. Just a couple of quick reminders for us as we conclude our time. We are still in the process of registering for our Pentecost boxes. These are boxes with all kinds of really amazing resources put together by Joanna Cummings, Reverend Joanna Cummings, and A Sacred Home, in collaboration with Foundries Family Ministries and Discipleship Ministries for our Pentecost season. There's stuff for your home altar. There's stuff for your spiritual reflection and growth. There's stuff that you can use with your families. There's stuff that you can do by yourself. Those boxes are free. You can pick them up at the church. There are a limited number that will be shipping. There is an opportunity for a free will donation that we would welcome to help offset the cost. So we're going to drop a link. We've already dropped the link into the comments section. Check those out. We'd encourage you to sign up for one. That registration will conclude here at the end of this week. And then finally, want to make sure that you know that the second in our 3-part series about the foundations of Christian discipleship, called The Shape of Our Lives, is starting next Sunday. We're going to drop a registration link in the comments section now. If you're interested in thinking through or thinking about what it means to build a solid foundation for discipleship, we would encourage you to consider signing up for this class. I'll be teaching it and would love to have you join me. So I think that's all we've got. Continue to join us each day during the week as our pastors lead us in our Facebook Lives. Tomorrow will be Ponderings from the Purple Parlor with Pastor Ginger at noon. I know that will be a real gift, and so I hope you'll join her and continue to join us throughout the week. Friends, as always, I give thanks to God for you. I pray that you are able to continue to find ways to be gentle with yourselves and gentle with one another, and hope that in this week and in all your days ahead, you are able to find ways to keep wandering toward wonder. Until next time, take good care.